that's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
Hello everybody. Whom the bells tolls. Metallica. Welcome back to my thoughts on Malazan Book of the Fallen, Book 8, Toll the Hounds, Books 3, 4, and the epilogue. Before I get into my spoiler-filled thoughts, I now have the entire book in context. And actually, I've been debating this all night. But this is definitely one of my favorite books. I think Midnight Tides might still be my favorite. Memories of Ice. And then this. Though, of course, if we're counting House of Chains, then all of Book 1 outranks everything else, because Karsa is by far my favorite character. Non-spoiler-wise. The last novel, Reaper's Gale, ended quite unhappily. I was quite upset, because, dang, I'm already tearing up. Oh my god. Troll Sangar was absolutely one of my favorites. When I got introduced to him in House of Chains, we saw his entire backstory in Midnight Tides, and it just felt so pointless in Reaper's Gale when they did that to him, and I wasn't happy about it. I was not. All that to say, Toll the Hounds also deals a lot with grief, but I also think it's a bit more hopeful and optimistic about it. And since it's, I mean, with the way spirits and stuff and ascendants always show up in Malazan after the fact, you never really know. But in case this is the last time we see Anamanda Rake, and this isn't a spoiler, the whole book's been leading to this. But I loved his character. You know, ever since you first get introduced to him, he kind of comes off as this edgy, you know, dark, cool, mysterious man, you know, a lot like Elric of Melbourne, or whatever the fudge is called, Melbourne, by Michael Moorcock, or The Witcher, or so on and so forth. These kind of like morally gray, darker characters. But ironically, in a sense, for someone who's a child of the dark, he's probably one of the brightest spots in this entire universe, who shines everywhere he goes. And he may not have always been like that, as I'm sure we'll get into in those prequels when we get to them. But as for what we've seen of him within these stories, he's been nothing but loving, compassionate, understanding. Just someone who demands your attention, demands following without ever having to ask you. You want to, by virtue of his being, you know, from his interactions in Guardians of the Moon, where he was so clearly so much more than what he just seems so much more deeper than the first impression gives you. Than to all the interactions he has with the other characters in Memories of Ice, you know. To hear. He's just been consistently a good man. And so, Anamanda Rake remains one of my favorites. You know, even though he was not in a huge amount of this series. but when he showed up, he always stole the show. And I know when Malazan and Erickson played D&D and stuff, that this was always like Erickson's, what he would play as was Animander. I can see why. But yeah, I think this is a really slow burn of a book. Slower than all the others, because usually the formula that Erickson usually goes, which I've kind of noticed, is you have setup in book 1, something usually moderately big happens in book 2, somewhere. Book 3 is another bit of setup, or leading to the grand finale that is book 4. That is usually how these things go, most of the time. This was books 1 through 3 were a slow build-up. So that way the crescendo of book 4 would hit harder, which it absolutely does. But as I said in part 1, this is very slow burn, a lot of introspection, a lot of talking, and there's action spread throughout, but it's everything about this particular plot is all kind of preparing you for the finale and to further the themes of this book, whether it be with grief or redemption or all those things. And no, I know in part 1 I kind of harped on like the religious aspect, and I know that when I said it was multifaceted, I mean that was just like a part of it. You know, it's also, you know, just like about, I mean, Animander Rake was not always a good person, or at least not the best person. And what we've seen in all of Malazan has been years after other things that he's done. You know, so he's been atoning a lot, trying to redeem, and trying not only himself but his people, right? To do right by his people. Or you look at Karsa, in where he started in book 4, and he's not exactly perfect now either. Nor is he. We're not even sure if he is really gonna change completely. I mean, he's clearly changed, but he's gonna change because right now he still wants to like end the world and bring it back to baser, simpler times. But we have literal, physical representations of the sins in the past by his 2 daughters in this book. I mean, they're not a huge part of the book, but, you know, he raped a woman in House of Chains as a prize, because he won. It was his right, as having conquered a people. So, to have the physical representation of his sins coming to haunt him in the form of his very own children that are the product of rape, not to mention the other side of the coin was what happened in Memories of Ice with Stony, and then Harlow, the child, and her with all the trauma she has over all that. But at the same time, Harlow's just a boy. He's not the rapist. And I forget, I didn't write it down, but a specific part where she's kind of like talking about there's nothing good. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to focus on that time, you know, because it's horrible. And Harlow's like, but you had one good thing come out of it. You know, me. Paraphrasing, but it was beautiful. And yeah, I have stuff to talk about, spoiler-wise. But at first I would have said this is below Gardens of the Moon, you know, like the 4th best. But the more I've talked about it and thought about it before making this video, which is why usually I make these videos right after I finish. But 2 things. 1, I finished it at work. And 2, I really had to think about it. But it's actually like neck and neck with me now with Memories of Ice, the more I talk about it. Of course, some of it wouldn't hit as hard without Memories of Ice. So, but I just think the theming, the pacing, the philosophical, religious stuff being discussed throughout it. I don't know, just, it hits really hard. It works. It all comes together perfectly. To Traveler's Identity, which if you were only reading the Book of the Fallen, then you wouldn't know. It wasn't really a surprise to me, because I read Return of the Crimson Guard already, which publication-wise I think it would have been out regardless. So either you just didn't read it because you didn't care to read Asamont's work, or you already knew this. But, we learned some things about Traveler, and there's an epic finale with Traveler, and that was cool. Not too much to say non-spoiler-wise about that. But I think this book is phenomenal, I guess I'll say, in the short term. And I think, obviously, if you're 8 books in, or you're 7 books in, you're going to read it. Like, you can't stop. You got to finish it. You only have 3 books left. You got to finish it. But it's really, really good. It may be one of the strongest works in all of Malazan, if not the strongest. Though I am biased to my boy Troll Sangar, so I'm still going to give it to Midnight Tides. But it's a really good work. Not to mention, Croupy, he's an acquired taste. Krupp, not everybody loves him. Some people despise him. But he also just has some really genuine moments in here. Like, not even, he's always himself, right? But there are times where there's kind of like behind that is like, I really care about all of you. Whether it be Cutter or Murillo or whoever, Croupy, Krupp really cares. Anyway, I'm just saying, that's about it for non-spoiler. Read it, please. Now, I will preference when I get into spoilers that I'm gonna miss some stuff. There's a lot that happens in this book, and if I didn't mention your favorite part, I'm sorry. But let me know some of the things that stuck out to you in this book in the comment section below. Okay, I'm gonna get into spoilers. If you don't want that, here's your warning. Get out of here. But the entire book gets a thumbs up from me. So we begin with book 3. To Die in the Now. Gruntle and Mappo, faint, sweetest sufferance, go into Male's realm. It's not like a huge part, but that's something they're doing. There's also this really interesting thing where there's this dream that Gruntle has, but it's also like time travel. A bit confused about that. But Gruntle is a tiger in the ancient past, and that entire section was really cool. Really cool. Don't have too much to add to that, but it was a really cool sequence. Ditch, who was a mage that we saw in like the prologue, is back, along with Draconis, and they're both stuck in Dragonpur. We also get reintroduced to Lady Envy. She returns in this book. She's not a huge part of it, but she is here. Shadow Throne and Cotillion have a conversation with Karsa, which was pretty sick, gotta say. I always love when characters like cross over and interact. So, what did I say? Pickers. Oh, Picker. She summons like a version or an aspect of Perrin, Gyno's Perrin, for like an instant with the help of Raced. Then we had Chalice and Cutter, who were having their little meet and greets. I guess you could, they're having sex, basically. That's all that they're really doing. But ultimately, it comes down to, Cutter's like, it's not gonna work out. So good for Cutter. It was interesting. There's this. Sorry, I was long pause. Draconis is trapped in his own sword right now, right? In Dragonpur. Yet, his own mindset, even if he's stuck in the sword, he would never break it. Because he created it. But it really speaks to Anamanda Rake that it seems to be his plan is to break it, and that he is completely content with doing so. Because no other being would do that. In fact, a lot of the finale hinges on people wanting it. They want the power that it could give them. They want to wield it. And Anamanda Rake, even since as early as Guard of the Moon, hasn't really used it that much. You know, he could really abuse that, but he doesn't. And he really has no qualms about breaking it, which may in fact be the plan. Also, Carson and Samar just have the biggest sexual tension ever. Are they ever gonna do it? I don't know. But they both, I mean, Carson's very clear. But Samar, you know, for all of her protesting, she certainly gets angry at him. Sometimes legitimately, but sometimes is it because a bit of you does want to? I think a bit of you does want to. Otherwise, why are you getting so worked up over this? You know, like, if I'm not interested in someone, they're like, yeah, you want to. I'm like, no, I mean, keep believing what you want. I don't. So, good day, you know. But she gets really flustered about it. So, I'm just saying. Tula Shorn, a dragon, gets introduced. He's pretty cool. But Shorn, remember, Shorning, Troll Sangar, Shorning, all connected. There's this interesting thing. I don't remember who was saying it because it's been a while now. But somebody talks about like the cripple goddess kind of like courageous. Because like you kind of, your power is kind of amplified by whoever's worshiping you. But the crippled god's power comes from the weak, the feeble, the hurting. So he kind of has to take that on himself in order to gain power from them. All that pain and suffering that he puts onto himself. Which is an interesting perspective, as he's very clearly the overarching villain of the entire story. And yet, somebody tries to claim that in a certain point of view, as Obi-Wan might say, he's being a bit courageous. It was interesting. Unless I misread that. But that was interesting. I think this is a discussion that Karsa was having with Samar. But Karsa just says goodwill is not something that needs an apology. And I just love the quote, so I wrote that down. But yeah, so Tula Shorn, the dragon, we learn used to be in charge of the Hounds of Shadow, which is interesting. You know, one thing that I've noticed, and I've been rather disappointed in the entire Book of the Fallen series, and this is because this is not what Steven Erickson seems to really care about, which is in-universe fake politics. The first time we actually got a little political intrigue was in Return of the Crimson Guard by Esselmont. But that has never been the focal point. Erickson is much more about the emotional stuff, or philosophy, but not about the politicking. Like Game of Thrones, all of that is political maneuvering, you know, subterfuge throughout. Half of the best scenes of Game of Thrones or The Song of Ice and Fire aren't fighting with swords or whatever. It's two people talking in a room trying to outplay one another. Those are the scenes you live for in that type of story. But Malazan's been pretty much out of that because Erickson's dealing with stuff on so much more of a grand scale, on the cosmic scale, that who cares about what two politicians are complaining about? Fair enough, but it does help build the world and explore things a bit more. So all that to say, there's this little scene with Cole and this guy named Orr, because they're both councilmen in Darushtistan, and they do a little bit of this political politicking, and Cole gets him to shut up, which I really enjoyed that scene, because he basically outmaneuvered the guy and got him to shut up. Like, so do you still want to go and do that? No? Good. Bye. It was a good scene. So Gorliss, who's this guy, I haven't really talked about him too much, but he's married to Chalice, and he fights Murillo. And Murillo, he's a womanizer, but he's also like older now. And they fight, and Murillo dies. And I can't say like that I'm sad, because to be honest, I mean, so much of the series doesn't focus on the Darushistan people. I was bummed. I wasn't like bursting in tears or anything. But it's more about what it does to everyone else. Cutter, even Krupp. But, Murillo went out trying to be a good person. He wanted to help Harlow, the child. But he just was too old for this. So he lost his life, unfortunately. Yeah. Moving on. There's a scene between Shorn, Shadowthrone, and Cotillion. I got nothing to add, but it was a good scene. Also, Fenrir, Tog, Finanderi, Treach, war gods of the ancient past, because ascendancy works with people believing in you, right? It's part of the whole deal. So back in the day, you get a bunch of tribal people, and you got a bear that killed like 15 of your people, right? And you fear this thing in awe. Why wouldn't they also ascend? So that was a pretty interesting concept, that we had like bear gods and tiger gods and back in the day. Karso goes on his philosophical spiel about the evils of civilization, again, with his "we own nothing. We deserve nothing, necessarily." And I think this is when Samar brings up, like, what about those, all the people used to conquer? He's like, I was young. But, again, Karsa is the best character. He steals the show every time he appears in these books, so. And then there's this quote later on: being doubtful isn't a sin. Skepticism is a criminal act. So, I think that the quote was, skepticism is a criminal act. And, again, multifaceted, but a lot of this has to do with the Redeemer, which is very much, a lot of it could be a parallel to Christianity. And I will, concede that it was wrong of me to say, because I don't know, that Steven Erickson doesn't understand. He might very well understand and be talking about American Christianity, where a lot of people just go on Sundays and that's it, and then they just act like themselves for the rest of the week, and they're not actually trying to do better, even though following, like Christ or whatever you want to say. Part of the deal is like you are continually working to be better, and you'll never be perfect because no one is, but it's the continual work up until the day you croak to be better. But, and again, this might just be a critique of people who don't really follow what they say they follow. But just to be explicitly clear, and again, last time I'll do this, but doubting isn't the problem. Skepticism also isn't the problem. No one, again, if you are critiquing within the worldview, no one goes to hell for not believing. You go to hell because of your sins. Again, so the last video I made an analogy about bail, right? Having the right money to get out of jail. If you don't have the money, then you do the time for the crime. Again, we're not getting into a whole discussion about, well, maybe everything I'm doing isn't a crime. I don't believe it is. Whole different discussion. Point is, if it's true Sin is sin. You owe a price for it. You can't pay it off, so you do the time. Hell, which is for ever or whatever. Or you go to heaven. But the only way to get to heaven, because you don't have the money for it, is to accept the bail. So the justice in that is that someone else has paid for it. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say. You don't go to hell for doubt. You get hell for your own actions. And the only reason you don't go is because someone else's actions paid for yours. You see what I'm saying? That's it. As for the Redeemer in terms of Octavian, I guess it would be different. He's not even exactly sure. He's constantly doubting himself, and he's like a god now. So, you know, but that's because Octavian's super humble. So, and then anyway, we jump on to the grand finale, which is book 4, Toll the Hounds. Another quote: "Grief is solitary. To face death is to stand alone." Now, of course, Crocus Cutter wants revenge, so he finds Gorlas and kills him. As we're nearing the end, the biggest thing happens. This is like the big grand finale, which is that Hood, Death himself, shows up to Darushstan. And everything at this moment, super cinematic. We get like quite a few different point of views of like these random characters we'll never meet again. They're just for the sake of this particular plot, from like an everyday family man to a guy that abuses his kids and so on and so forth. You get these different perspectives as they all die, because death is coming. Until Hood comes as this last guy, and he actually feels like, emotions, and lets him live. It was just, you could picture it. It was perfection in every sense of the word. Like, the whole segment was so entertaining. I can't even, like, you have to read it to like understand. Like, it was peak. That was amazing. And then what a my face. I've never really done that for a book ever, but Hood is walking through the city. Who else is walking through the city but Anamanda Rake with Dragon Pier? And then Hood shows up to where Anamanda Rake is. Anamanda Rake slices Hood's head off. Now Hood is in the sword. Now, of course, this is a part of a big, grander plan. This is what Rake wanted, but still. So that happens. Karsa promises to watch Traveler's back. And again, there's multiple different characters trying to do different things right now. But Calor, if you remember Calor, he wants the sword. And so Anamanda Rake's good buddy Spinnick delays him from getting it. Enough for everything that needs to happen so that Calor won't get it. Also, Death, Hood, is a Jagat. That's because they say like he has a tusk or something. So like, he's a Jagat. Like, that's crazy. So again, so there's a whole sort of, so Anamanda Rake seemingly wants the sword to be broken. He also wants to seemingly release the people within the sword, or at least some of them. He's trying to like, it has something to do with Mother Dark and wanting to like get her attention, sort of, kind of. But he killed Hood so that Hood would be in the sword, and then Hood could command armies of the dead inside the realm, inside the sword. I know it's complicated. And so you have like this entire army that Hood has brought to fight against this army of chaos within the sword. And one of them is Iskar Jarek. Iskar Jarek is Whiskey Jack, and he's meant to command the army of the dead. And so that's all going on. And then Traveler comes upon Rake, and they have a big, I imagine it's a big like anime Dragon Ball Z like sort of fight where everything is so fast you can't see it, except for those certain instances where they'd be blocking with a sword, and then they'd say something, so like then you could see them, but then they'd go zipping around again. It probably wasn't like that, but I'm gonna prefer to imagine it that way. And again, if you had read Return of the Crimson Guard, you would know this already. If you hadn't read Return of the Crimson Guard, then this would be a big to you, which is that Das Immolter, the sword of the Emperor back in the day, is Traveler. So that's the big thing there. And another thing about this too, like, Traveler really respects and cares about Animander. He doesn't want to hurt him, but he kills Rake. They're fighting with a sword. I'm kind of confused exactly what happened. I forget. But seemingly one of the times, they were going back and forth, and one time he hit Dragon Emperor enough that it went back and like sliced into his head of Rake's, I think. But again, that was also part of the plan, because then Rake would go inside the sword. Also, all this big important stuff is going on. We have Krupi versus Iscariel Pust, which I never knew I needed so bad, but that was amazing. They both have their mules, because they have this weird thing with mules, and it's a very comedic little breather in between, where we have this fat man who's super powerful and Iscariel Pust attacking one another, and they don't stay on it too long, but it was beautiful. And we have this epic crossover event. You realize how many characters are on Malazan until they start interacting. You're like, oh my god. We have Cutter, Samar, Karsa, and Traveler all in the same vicinity, which is pretty crazy. And then Karsa asks Cutter, "Who are you?" And Cutter replies, "I'm Crocus. I was once a thief." Karsa replies, "Be a thief once more, and steal me a hound's life this night." Crocus in his brain goes, "Shit," and just replies, "I'll try." Karsa replies, "That'll do." Dude, like rap battle epic poetry. That was one of the hardest lines that Karsa's ever dropped. Like, can we put that on my tombstone? Can we friggin' be a thief once more and steal me a hound's life this night? Like, bars. It's done. Karsa's the best. There's nothing else to be said. Like, he wins. Personality contest. It's him. I don't even care if he destroys all civilization. Karsa wins. It's the end. Over. Done. But yeah, so we have the big finale. The sword breaks. Harlow, the child, I didn't really talk about him either. He reconciles with Stony. Mappo and Gruntle are still just kind of on their way back to Lether, because Mappo's trying to find, Akirium. Everything kind of gets settled. Everything kind of calms down. And the story ends, left for whatever happens in the next 2 books. There's some stuff I'm leaving out, but that's about the gist of what I want to talk about. But again, this book is very slow, more slow than all the others, so I can understand why some people really don't enjoy it, because you have to kind of get through a lot. But I think it's really worth it, because that finale is really incredible, and it just really makes you love Animander, and really makes you want to read those prequels, because it's more time spent with a character who's only been in this 10-book series in 3 books. Guardians of the Moon, Memories of Ice, Toll the Hounds. That's it. We've had other things that have indirectly taught us more about Animander through other characters like Andrist, or through the Tisti Eater, or through, what was his name? Silch's Ruin. All these characters that kind of inform us more about Animander himself, but we didn't actually have Animander back until this book. So, so many things. Clip is a dick. I'm glad he's gone. Nemander, I actually like Nemander, and I hope he plays a role in the next 2 books in some way, shape, or form. I can understand why people wouldn't like them either, though, because they don't do much for a lot of the plot. They can just sit there and talk, so. Kaller is probably the most nuanced here, because he seemed pretty evil in Memories of Ice. You see, I mean, that introduction with him. But they give him a bit more nuance here. So it was nice to, a bit more 3-dimensional of a person. But yeah, after talking about it for 30 minutes and having thought about it all night, it's definitely top 3. It is above Gardens of the Moon for me. It's a really good book. It's not gonna be everyone's cup of tea. And that's even saying if you are a Malazan fan. But it was a big hit for me. Steven Ericksons will never watch this, but I know I kind of like. Again, the whole Redeemer aspect thing was multifaceted. It was about a lot of things. It was about a lot of characters within this itself. Apart from the greater idea of redemption, and because a lot of times, just in fantasy or in fiction in general, you have like these redemption arcs that just aren't earned. So it was more meta stuff with that too. On top of just that was only like one tiny aspect to it. But I figured, most people doing these reviews aren't doing it from like that sort of perspective, so I thought I would just give mine. That makes it different from another one. But I love the theme of redemption in most series as long as it's done well. Like, for example, I've reviewed the entirety of the Star Wars Expanded Universe. So, Star Wars, Vader, we talk about Vader's redemption, but does it, fix all the evils and wrongs he's done beforehand? No. But emotionally, as an audience, it doesn't matter, right, if it really fixes everything or atones for everything. It's just that in that act, you choose to be a good person instead of a bad person. And, what's the Joker say in The Dark Knight, right? Like, in their final moments, you learn who a person really is. So, Vader was dying. In those last moments, he could have chose to act any number of ways, but we saw him for who he decided he wanted to be in the end. And I think that's ultimately what matters the most. I think you can apply that to a lot of things with Animander Rake as well. We don't have his full backstory. You will if you read those prequels. But he wasn't always a swell guy, right? But he's spent his life, trying to help his people and fix a lot of the wrongs that were done. So, and then, I'd even mention Kaladin Brood, who's barely in this book either, but the Tissiani don't like bury their dead, right? They don't do that. But then also, there's this whole thing, and the sheer love, platonically, no, not romantic, just best buds. Oh, the whole scene, I can't. I'm not doing it on camera. Anyway, just Kaladin Brood after Rake died was a lot. I'll say, for me. I don't know why it hit so hard, but it did. But we'll stop there. So, anyway, I really enjoyed it. I really loved it, and I think you will too. And if you've already read it, I want to know things you loved about it, and some of your favorite moments, and other things such as that in the comment section below. I'm almost done. I have 2 books, and then I'll finish the entire Book of the Fallen. Before we get to Dust of Dreams, I have Orb Scepter Throne by Ian C. Alsamont, and then for the next 2 books, it will just be Dust of Dreams and The Crippled God. And we'll officially have finished the Book of the Fallen. So, I'll see you guys next time. Till then, man, I don't know. be a thief once more and steal me a hound's life this night. Thank you.